It's February 21st, 2022. Several major airlines suspend flights to Ukraine. Tensions are rising, but for many, life goes on. On the night of February 23rd, people in Ukraine go to bed uneasy, but few truly believe the worst is coming. By dawn, their world is unrecognizable. War has begun. Airstrikes, fuel shortages, and cash withdrawal limits send Ukraine's economy into free fall. On paper, it should collapse, but somehow it doesn't. How did Ukraine's economy survive? This analysis breaks down its transformation, how it functioned before the war, how it has adapted under fire, and what role Western support has played in keeping it alive. Hello my friends, my name is Artur Rehi and I am an Estonian military blogger and reserve soldier. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to the channel and become a monthly member and buy me a coffee. Link is in the description below. As Western Ukraine aid flows remain uncertain and the war going on, the question remains, can Ukraine sustain itself economically, or will financial pressure prove as dangerous as military threats? Before the Russian invasion, Ukraine boasted a diverse economy with key industries that were of significant importance both regionally and globally. Among its most vital sectors were agriculture, heavy industry, energy, and a rapidly growing IT sector, each contributing significantly to exports and economic stability. Known as the breadbasket of Europe, Ukraine accounted for approximately 10% of global wheat exports and 47% of global sunflower oil exports, feeding millions worldwide and playing a critical role in global food security. Its fertile Chernozem, or black soil, is among the richest in the world, allowing high crop yields, making agriculture one of Ukraine's most valuable economic pillars. These agricultural exports sustained food supplies in regions such as Africa, the Middle East, and Asia, reinforcing Ukraine's strategic importance in global trade. Beyond agriculture, Ukraine had significant industrial capacity. The steel and metallurgy sectors were among the largest in Europe, with cities like Mariupol and Rehi housing massive steelworks that supplied high-quality products for global markets. Ukraine was also one of the world's largest producers of iron ore, further solidifying its role in heavy industry. The shipbuilding industry, though in decline, still contributed to the economy, producing tankers, cargo vessels, and naval ships. Energy was another key sector. Ukraine possessed vast coal reserves, a strong nuclear sector, and served as a vital transit hub for Russian natural gas flowing to Europe. At its peak, Ukraine transported nearly 40% of EU's Russian gas supply, making it a strategically significant energy player. Its 4 nuclear power plants, including Zaporizhzhia, the largest in Europe, contributed heavily to domestic energy production. Ukraine's IT and tech sector was another area of rapid growth. With highly educated workforce and competitive wages, the country became a leading outsourcing destination for global software development and tech services. By 2021, IT accounted for about 4% of GDP, with exports reaching $6.8 billion. Ukrainian companies excelled in cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and fintech, positioning the country as an important player in the global digital economy. Interestingly, Ukraine was home to some of the world's top competitive programmers, consistently ranking high in the international coding competitions. Taken together, these industries, agriculture, heavy industry, energy, and IT, formed the backbone of Ukraine's economy before the war. Despite its economic strengths, Ukraine faced deep structural issues even before the war, limiting its long-term stability and growth. One of the most persistent challenges was corruption. Transparency International's 2021 Corruption Perception Index ranked Ukraine 122nd out of 180 countries, reflecting widespread problems in governance. Corruption undermined foreign investment, with companies often hesitant to operate in an environment where bribery, political interference and weak rule of law was common. A notable example was the Privatbank scandal, where oligarchs allegedly siphoned billions of dollars from the country's largest commercial bank, prompting its nationalization in 2016. While anti-corruption efforts were ongoing, progress was slow, and the perception of an unpredictable business climate deterred many investors. However, Ukraine had started pushing back against the grip of business elites. For decades, a handful of powerful oligarchs controlled key industries, media outlets, and even political parties, shaping the country's economy and governance to serve their own interests. In 2021, Ukraine passed an anti-oligarchy law to curb their power by limiting their control over the media and requiring those who met specific wealth and influence criteria to officially register as oligarchs. It's so strange that in Ukraine, according to that law, if you meet certain criteria, you have an official title of an oligarch and you have to have it, otherwise you're against the law with that. You have like 3 billion and a massive influence, you are by law an oligarch. Just strange and a little bit funny. This designation imposed restrictions on their political activities and business dealings with government officials. While critics questioned how effectively the law could be enforced, it marked a clear attempt to weaken oligarch dominance and signaled a shift towards greater accountability. Ukraine's economy was also highly dependent on few key industries, making it vulnerable to external shocks. Agriculture and heavy industry dominated exports, but both sectors faced significant risks. Agriculture was susceptible to global price fluctuations, while the steel and coal industries struggled with aging infrastructure and declining global competitiveness. The lack of economic diversification meant that any downturn in these sectors could trigger widespread instability. Another long-standing issue was regional economic disparity. Western Ukraine, with closer EU ties and a growing service sector, saw more investment and higher wages, while eastern regions remained heavily industrialized but economically stagnant. This divide deepened after 2014, when the Russian-backed conflict in Donbass devastated local industries, further widening the gap. The prolonged instability in the east not only worsened economic conditions, but also drained government resources, as Ukraine was forced to increase defense spending instead of investing in long-term development. The inability to create a more balanced economic model meant that some regions thrived while others faced economic decline and social unrest, a divide that contributed to broader political instability and weakened investor confidence. The Russian invasion had immediate and devastating effects on Ukraine's economy, crippling key industries, trade routes, and infrastructure. As of January 2024, the Kyiv School of Economics estimated that the total damage to Ukraine infrastructure had surpassed 155 billion, nearly equivalent to Ukraine's entire pre-war annual GDP. The destruction encompassed nearly 250,000 residential buildings, thousands of roads, railways, and power stations, further disrupting economic activity. While much of Ukraine's infrastructure suffered heavy destruction, the fall of Mariupol was one of the war's most devastating economic losses. Before the invasion, Mariupol was a major industrial hub on the Sea of Azov, serving as a key export point for steel, coal, and grain. The city housed the Azovstal and Ilyich steelworks, two of Ukraine's largest metallurgical plants, which produced a significant share of the country's steel exports. With Mariupol's capture in May 2022, Ukraine lost access to the Sea of Azov and its steel export industry collapsed overnight. The destruction of these plants, coupled with the Russian occupation of the port, meant that one of Ukraine's most important industrial centers was effectively erased from its economy. Ukraine also lost Berdyansk, another important Sea of Azov port, which handled over 4 million tons of cargo annually. Though not as industrially vital as Mariupol, its occupation further restricted Ukraine's trade options, making it impossible to export goods through the Azov coast. Mariupol and Berdyansk were lost, but Ukraine's most critical port, Odessa, remained under its control. Russia's blockade of Odessa, however, threatened to bring exports to a standstill. Before the war, nearly 98% of Ukraine's grain exports moved through the Black Sea ports, with Odessa handling largest share. For a country where exports made up over 40% of the GDP, this was a severe blow. The blockade not only disrupted exports, but also caused global grain prices to spike, impacting food security in Africa, the Middle East and beyond. Adding to the economic turmoil, mass migration and the internal displacement drained Ukraine's workforce. Over 8 million Ukrainians fled to neighboring countries, while millions more were internally displaced, leaving businesses without workers, schools without students, and households without incomes. The World Bank estimated Ukraine's GDP contracted by over 30% in 2022, reflecting the scale of the disruption. Despite these setbacks, Ukraine demonstrated remarkable resilience, adapting its economy to wartime conditions. One of Ukraine's greatest economic victories came in the Black Sea, where it managed to partially break Russia's blockade and restore vital exports. In April 2022, the sinking of Moskva, the flagship of Russia's Black Sea fleet, I love to say, it was turning Moskva into the submarine, it was knocking it out cold, it was made it sleep with the fishes. Love it. But sinking the Moskva forced Russian warships to retreat, weakening their ability to enforce a full blockade. Over time, continued Ukrainian strikes on Russian naval presence further reduced its ability to disrupt trade. By late 2023, Ukraine's counteroffensive in the Black Sea had allowed Odessa to remain operational, with exports steadily increasing despite ongoing security threats. While the port was still vulnerable to missile attacks, Ukraine had successfully reopened critical trade routes, bringing export levels closer to pre-war figures and easing global food supply concerns. Beyond its naval successes, Ukraine's IT sector remained a key driver of resilience. Largely reliant on remote work, it managed to sustain operations and even expand its global footprint. Ukrainian software developers continued delivering services to international clients, becoming a vital source of foreign currency. By 2023, some tech companies had even relocated to safer areas in western Ukraine to ensure continuity. Agriculture also adapted to wartime conditions, although grain exports fell dramatically in 2022. Ukraine's farmers found ways to export via alternative routes, including rail and river systems. The establishments of EU solidarity lanes allowed agricultural goods to reach global markets, preventing a full-scale global food crisis. An informal economy emerged, providing livelihoods for those who lost formal employment. Industries also adjusted, with some factories relocating to safer regions and others pivoting to produce goods needed for the war effort, such as military equipment and medical supplies. These adaptive strategies underscored the resilience of Ukraine's people and its economy, ensuring that despite massive losses, the country continued to function. Western financial and military aid played a crucial role in keeping Ukraine's economy afloat during the war. With industries disrupted, tax revenues collapsing, and government spending skyrocketing, external support became a lifeline that prevented total economic collapse. Ukraine has received over $250 billion in financial, military, and humanitarian aid from Western countries. The United States and the European Union have been the largest contributors, with the EU pledging over 85 billion euros in direct support and the US providing more than 75 billion in various forms of assistance. Institutions like the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, and World Bank also played a role, issuing stabilization loans to ensure Ukraine could keep its financial system running. This funding was critical in covering government salaries, pensions, social services, and ensuring the country could still function despite the economic devastation. A large portion of the aid also went towards stabilizing Ukraine's currency, preventing hyperinflation, and ensuring basic economic transactions could continue. Without this external financial support, Ukraine's economy would have collapsed under the strain of war. Although military aid is often viewed separately from economic assistance, it had significant economic consequences. Western-supplied weapons allowed Ukraine to defend key infrastructure, keeping trade routes open and secure major cities that remained economic hubs. Additionally, Ukraine's defense sector saw a wartime economic boom, with arms production increasing to meet battlefield demands. Western contracts for military equipment, including drones and artillery shells, helped sustain jobs and industries that became essential to Ukraine's war economy. However, while this assistance stabilized Ukraine, it also came with challenges, delays, and long-term implications for the country's financial future. Western aid has kept Ukraine's economy running, but it is not guaranteed. Funding decisions depend on shifting political priorities, and delays have already created financial gaps. In the US, congressional debates have slowed or stalled aid packages, while Europe, some leaders have raised concerns over financial burden of long-term support. As economic pressures grow in donor countries, public opinion is shifting, with more voters questioning the cost of continued assistance. If these trends continue, Ukraine could face a sudden budget shortfall that makes it harder to maintain stability. Another challenge is debt. While some aid comes in direct financial support, much of it is in the form of loans that Ukraine will eventually have to repay. Institutions like the International Monetary Fund and World Bank have provided billions, but these funds come with long-term financial obligations that could strain Ukraine's post-war recovery. If repayment terms are strict, Ukraine may have to cut spending on reconstruction or economic development to meet its debt commitments. Even when financial aid is approved, bureaucratic hurdles and conditions on how money can be used slow down its impact. Some funds are tied to specific economic policies or reforms, limiting Ukraine's ability to allocate resources where they are needed most. This makes responding to urgent wartime challenges more difficult. Yet, sustaining an economy on foreign aid presents risks. Delays in funding, long-term financial obligations, and growing political uncertainty in donor nations. Since 2022, the Western financial aid has covered nearly 50% of Ukraine's budget, helping the country pay its workers, provide basic services, and keep its economy from collapsing. But what happens if that lifeline starts to weaken? The first impact would be on the government's ability to function. Without steady financial support, Ukraine would struggle to pay public sector wages, pensions, and social benefits. This would directly affect millions of people, reducing household incomes and weakening consumer spending, one of the few economic drivers left during the war. Prices would also rise. With less foreign money supporting the economy, the hryvnia could weaken, making imports like fuel and medicine more expensive. Inflation would eat into wages, putting extra strain on everyday Ukrainians. Businesses would feel the effects too. Many industries still operating, such as agriculture and manufacturing, depend on government support to survive. If funding is cut, businesses may close, leading to job losses and lower production. At the same time, foreign investors may hesitate to invest, fearing that Ukraine's financial position is becoming too unstable. If Western support declines significantly, Ukraine would have to find new ways to cover its costs. Throughout history, countries in crisis have been forced to seek new economic partners, shift their alliances, or make tough concessions. For Ukraine, the choices it makes next could reshape its future far beyond the war itself. To mitigate the risk of potential reduction in Western support, Ukraine must identify immediate solutions to sustain its economy during the wartime. While no single alternative can fully replace the scale of Western assistance, a combination of new trade partnerships, alternative financial mechanisms, and domestic industrial expansion could help Ukraine navigate a funding shortfall. One of the most viable options is expanding trade and economic partnerships beyond the West. Before the war, China was Ukraine's largest trading partner, accounting for 12.1% of total trade in 2021. However, Beijing's close ties with Moscow and its careful neutrality in the war make deepening economic cooperation unlikely. India, Turkey and Gulf states offer more realistic alternatives. Saudi Arabia has already invested over $500 million into Ukraine's agriculture, and strengthening such partnerships could provide export stability and financial backing. Turkey remains a vital trade corridor for grain exports, playing a key role in securing alternative Black Sea routes. India, as one of the world's largest food importers, could become a more significant buyer of Ukraine's agricultural products, helping to offset lost markets. Expanding these relationships would not fully compensate for lost Western aid, but could provide much needed economic relief. Ukraine could also tap into alternative financial mechanisms to bridge funding gaps. Some Middle Eastern sovereign wealth funds, particularly from Saudi Arabia, Qatar and the United Arab Emirates, have historically invested in conflict-affected nations, providing emergency financing for critical infrastructure and reconstruction. While such partnerships could bring short-term liquidity, they also require careful negotiation, as financial backing from Gulf nations often comes with investment conditions or long-term strategic interests. Ukraine may also seek bilateral loan agreements with non-Western economies willing to support its economic stability in exchange for trade and investment opportunities. Another potential avenue is expanding Ukraine's defense industry and military exports. Before the war, Ukraine had a well-established arms production sector, and the ongoing conflict has significantly increased domestic arms manufacturing. In 2024, Ukraine announced the capacity to produce up to 4 million drones per year, marking a major shift in its defense capabilities. Increased domestic production not only strengthens Ukraine's self-reliance, but also opens the possibility of exporting certain military technologies to allied nations, generating revenue that could help offset reduced external aid. Partnering with European defense firms for joint production could further enhance Ukraine's position in the global arms market. While none of these measures alone can replace Western support, a combination of trade diversification, alternative financial partnerships, and industrial expansion could help Ukraine weather short-term funding gaps and increase its long-term economic resilience. As Ukraine's economy navigates the turmoil of war, it exemplifies resilience amid adversity. Farmers replanting bombed fields, coders working in blackouts, and a nation refusing to collapse. Yet its survival hinges on a precarious web of global aid, trade, and sheer determination. Historian Fernand Braudel once wrote, "War is the motor of economic change." But Ukraine's story asks a harder question. Can an economy outlast a war if the world's attention fades? The answer may not be in statistics, but in whether the country can endure long enough to rebuild. My friends, thank you for trusting me with your time. These videos do take a lot of time and effort and resources to make, to research, to film, to edit. And by the time you watch it, multiple people have worked on them for hours. perhaps days. If you like these videos, be sure to subscribe to the channel on YouTube and also become a monthly member of Buy Me a Coffee. Link is in the description below. And just to show my appreciation of Buy Me a Coffee monthly members, I am now going to butcher 5 of their names with my Estonian pronunciation. Neil Dotsvortk, Hendrik Dalgaard, Katharine Winter, Mikke Hunt, Stephen Parsons. Thank you to each and every one of you 5, and if you haven't joined yet, please do join up monthly membership on Buy Me a Coffee. Until my next video, my friends, which is every Monday and every Friday, be sure to be back, and bye bye.